It's 6 p.m. on Tuesday here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Hwang Sung-hee. And these are the top stories we're following at this hour. In a sign of thawing relations, the two Koreas agreed to hold reunions for families separated by the Korean War next month. South Korea maintains its expansionary tone in setting next year's budget to prop up growth. However, doing so will raise the debt-to-GDP ratio to over 40%. It's been 4 days since a fishing boat capsized off Korea's southern coast. Search and rescue efforts continue, but hope of finding the 8 who are still missing are fading fast. The two Koreas have settled on the date, location, and scale of their planned set of family reunions after marathon talks. The resumption of reunions for war-separated families was one of the key agreements reached during last month's high-level talks between the two Koreas. Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
The two Koreas agreed Tuesday to hold their planned set of reunions for war-separated families from October 20th to 26th at North Korea's Mount Kumgang resort. The event will be held in 2 rounds, allowing 100 family members from each side to see their loved ones again. This includes South Korean war prisoners and abductees captured by the North. Following marathon negotiations that lasted for nearly 24 hours, South Korea's chief delegate said the two sides had primarily haggled over the timing of the event.
South Korea suggested holding the event as soon as possible in time for Chuseok, but North Korea explained that pushing the reunions back was inevitable as it needs more time to prepare, considering the Chuseok holiday and its national event.
That national event is the 70th anniversary of the founding of North Korea's ruling Workers' Party on October 10th. There is speculation that the North may be preparing to launch a long-range rocket to mark the occasion, which could jeopardize the family reunions. Millions of families were separated during the Korean War in the 1950s. Nearly half of the 130,000 registered divided family members in the South have already passed away. During the negotiations, Seoul also made separate proposals, such as to hold the reunions on a regular basis and exchange lists of surviving separated family members from both sides. But the Koreas agreed to discuss these fundamental issues in the near future. Tuesday's outcome may seem like nothing out of the ordinary, but some experts note its significance as it's the first joint effort by the two Koreas to adhere to one of their key agreements reached at the landmark inter-Korean talks last month. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And South Korea's rival parties hailed the agreement between the two Koreas. The ruling Saenuri Party characterized the deal as a turning point for inter-Korean relations, as the two sides had built on last month's agreement. The main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, also welcomed today's deal, saying it would act as a foundation for more humanitarian exchanges in the future. But the opposition party said it was unfortunate the two Koreas were unable to reach an agreement on holding the reunions on a regular basis. Meanwhile, lawmakers have laid out plans for their annual audit of state affairs, which gets started in just 2 days, with representatives from rival parties seeking to set the stage for an upcoming general election next spring. Ji Myung-gil has more.
The ruling Saenuri Party is hoping to make livelihood reforms the focus of this year's annual parliamentary audit.
The upcoming assembly audit will be focused on whether the government implemented effective policies to improve the livelihoods of the people. During the audit, we will cooperate with the opposition to avoid getting embroiled in political wrangling.
The ruling bloc said it would reward lawmakers who come up with good policy alternatives for the government that help resolve various kinds of hardships for the public. The main opposition MPAD said it would focus on reviewing obstacles to reforming the country's family-owned conglomerates or chaebol, and key corporate executives will be summoned for questioning. The chaebol have come under increasing scrutiny in recent months following a series of high-profile cases involving some of Korea's biggest companies.
Business tycoons will be required to participate in the audit as witnesses. Conglomerates have lost their entrepreneurial spirits and drive for innovation due to preferential treatment. We also plan to evaluate the inadequacies in President Park Geun-hye's administration.
The MPAD also said it is determined to fix the government's mistakes by correcting existing policies and/or presenting new policy alternatives. Analysts expect the two parties to seek to strengthen their standing with the public through the audit, ahead of a general election next April. Kim Young-gyun, Arirang News.
In a landmark decision, the Japanese Supreme Court has ruled that 3 surviving Korean victims of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings are entitled to full compensation for their medical expenses. It's the first time full compensation will be paid to victims who live outside of Japan. The ruling puts an end to a 4-year legal battle against the Osaka prefectural government. It had argued that the Koreans did not qualify for compensation because they were not receiving treatment in Japan. The prefecture said it could not verify the validity of the medical treatment they received. The High Court dismissed the argument as flimsy. The ruling is expected to affect similar cases that are currently ongoing in other local Japanese courts. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has won a second 3-year term as chief of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. That means he will most likely keep his post as prime minister until 2018 unless the lower house of parliament is dissolved before then and the LDP fails to win the following general election. Abe's policy team is expected to continue its push for controversial legislation that would allow Japanese troops to fight overseas for the first time since World War II. The team has vowed to revive the country's economy during his second term as party leader. Abe ran unopposed as his only potential rival failed to find enough sponsors to register for the vote. Senior health officials from some 40 countries are in Seoul this week to attend a meeting on the global health security agenda. During the 3-day event that started Monday, health experts are discussing ways to help countries improve early prevention of infectious diseases such as Ebola and MERS. The meeting will produce a so-called Seoul statement tomorrow following a high-level meeting. Search and rescue operations are continuing off the southern coast of Korea for the 8 people still missing after their chartered fishing boat capsized on Saturday. With hope fading by the hour, the relatives of the missing have traveled to the scene of the sinking to await word on their loved one's fate. Han Da-eun reports.
Family members of the 8 recreational fishers who have yet to make it home gathered at a southern port to head to the area where their loved ones went missing. They try their best to remain calm while boarding a speedboat that takes them to waters off Chuja Island, where the accident happened late Saturday. Seeing the cold waters up close, some began crying inconsolably, wailing, while some find the strength to fight back the tears. But it's hard for them to contain their emotions as they shout out the names of their relatives.
Although I'm here, there's nothing I can do now. I just want to see my son, even if he's dead.
Many say their last hope now is to see the bodies of their sons and husbands one last time and lay them to rest so that everyone, both the victims and their families, can at least try to find some peace of mind. But adding to their agony, the bad weather conditions continue hampering search and rescue operations.
The bodies have to be found as soon as possible for all of our sakes, but I'm very doubtful about whether they can be recovered from such a vast area of water.
Search operations have continued for a few days now, but another day passes without much progress. Although there isn't much hope left, the family members still pray that somewhere their loved ones might have survived and will make their way back home. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
Korea's finance ministry has laid out the government's budget proposal for next year. It'll be 3% higher than this year's as Officials hope to fire up the sluggish economy. But at the same time, there are growing concerns about the deficit. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
The Korean government laid out a modest spending plan for 2016, aiming to breathe fresh life into the faltering economic recovery, but it's the smallest on-year growth after the global financial crisis in 2009. The Finance Ministry said Tuesday the government will increase spending by 3% to 386.7 trillion won, or $320 billion, a figure that includes a budget supplement package approved in July. Nearly 32% of the total will be spent on improving social welfare, with about 13% of that earmarked for lifting youth employment. The government will also boost spending on defense by 4% as it aims to modernize military equipment in the face of possible threats from North Korea. While the government says it'll narrow the deficit gap dramatically in the next 5 years, the problem is the growing level of government debt. Sovereign debt levels are expected to surpass 40% of the country's GDP, the highest figure on record.
The higher level of national debt should be seen as an inevitable way to support the economy. But the government will do its part to shore up the domestic economy by all means.
The government said the country's fiscal deficit next year will expand to represent 2.3% of its GDP from 2.1% this year.
Although the country's fiscal deficit is at optimum levels compared to other OECD nations, it has full potential to reach worrying heights, as the country's aging population and the youth unemployment crisis will only push the government to spend more in the years to come.
With mounting concerns that the government's spending plan will have a negative effect on the country's fiscal soundness, especially in the face of the global economic slowdown, both the government and experts point to the need for the National Assembly to approve a pay-as-you-go system, a rule that ensures new spending or tax cuts be paid for in advance through spending reductions or tax increases. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, with more analysts saying the effects of China's slowing economy could be more serious than originally thought, countries dependent on China are on high alert. Recent data projects that Korea will be the third hardest hit if demand from China continues to fall. Kwon So-ah has the details.
China's imports fell 13.8% in August in dollar terms from the same month last year. That's a huge drop from July and a big difference from experts' expectations. China's exports also experienced a 5.5% drop last month. With China's trade figures continuing the downward trend, there are concerns that the already substantial impact on countries intimately tied to China could bring further dark clouds in their economic growth. China's imports were down 14.6% over the first 7 months of the year from the same period in the previous year. According to an analysis by The Guardian, if the level of decline stays the same for the rest of the year, New Zealand and Australia would be the countries hit the hardest, with their GDP expected to drop by 1.9% and 1.7% respectively. And Korea, which exports around a quarter of its outbound shipments to China, would be the third most affected country, with a 1% decline in its GDP and a loss of almost $13.9 billion in exports. Although China imports the largest amount of goods from Korea, the proportion dropped by almost 1% from January to July. Experts say Korea will have to defend itself from more risks from China with new policy measures, such as a cut to its key interest rate. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The El Nino brewing in the Pacific Ocean is getting really big, with equatorial waters significantly warmer than average. Researchers are predicting that this El Nino could be among the strongest since records began in 1950. For more on how this could bring the world some wild weather, Lee Ji-won reports.
This is a satellite image of the water temperature distribution of the Pacific Ocean.
The red and white areas show an abnormal increase in temperature, signaling the return of the weather phenomenon known as El Nino. El Nino is caused by strong winds from the west, blowing warm water towards the center and eastern sides of the Pacific. According to the World Meteorological Organization, water temperatures have been rising since July. With the ocean already 2 degrees Celsius warmer than average, we are only a 0.5 degree away from experiencing a more powerful form of the phenomenon, dubbed Super El Nino.
Considering that water temperatures in the region peak in the winter, there's a high chance we'll see a Super El Nino this season.
If a Super El Nino does happen, extreme weather conditions are expected to affect the world, causing scorching heat, severe droughts, and forest fires. The most recent Super El Nino was recorded in the winter of 1997 to 98. Korea was hit by abnormally mild temperatures that year and one of the most severe rainstorms the following summer. Meteorologists expect that with El Nino building up in the Pacific, in addition to the ongoing global warming, temperatures will hit new highs next year. 이지원, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. More updates coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time, so stay tuned and goodbye for now.